The world outside was on fire. Flames whipped the glass unrelentingly, punishing us for daring to venture further than man was ever destined to go. The flames were so close you could have touched them had it not been for the thick windows that kept our blood from boiling. I imagine my knuckles would have been white had I been able to see them hidden away inside the heavy gloves of my suit as I held onto my seat, feeling the bone-rattling vibrations of re-entry traveling up my spine. I closed my eyes, and just for a moment, I could feel everything. The buffeting of the capsule, my heart racing in my chest, the heat of re-entry just on the other side of the window, and I knew in that moment that this was it. As I hung in the balance between fallen heroes and history, I knew this was the moment I'd longed for all my life, even if it was my last. With a gut-wrenching jerk, the drogues deployed and my eyes were open once again. The fire outside the window flickered like a candle in the wind, and then it was gone altogether, replaced instead by streams of vapor ripping across the surface of the capsule, winding their way around the window frame at just below the speed of sound. The wispy CO2 atmosphere condensed by the immense pressure of our fall from the heavens as we hammered the sky into submission on our journey to the surface below. With the flames surrendered to the wind, the horizon had appeared. Unassuming and distinctly alien, the serene red sliver at the bottom of the sky was an undeniable reminder that we were millions of miles from home, about to land on a world humanity had only dreamed of touching since they'd first noticed the red flicker in the sea of stars above. What felt like an eternity couldn't have lasted but a mere moment. The capsule rocked back and forth ever so slightly on the wind as it hung beneath the drogues, continuing its descent. The sky got smaller, the stars dimmer, and the red sliver grew until it consumed the view out the window. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the surface below the closer we got to touchdown, and the contours of the land emerged, showing us the subtle opulent beauty of the landscape. There was a metallic click and the feeling that we'd lost something big, followed shortly thereafter by a second gut-wrenching jerk, reassuring us that it was nothing more than the mains deploying. Now we were floating. Or so it seemed. On Mars, the air was so thin that parachutes weren't enough to bring the craft and its passengers to a safe landing on the red rock. As we hung on the chutes, still descending at a rapid rate that felt slow after our ballistic fall from the stars, I waited anxiously for the retro rockets to fire and deliver us to our capsule's final resting place, in the first place where humanity would step onto another planet. My stomach lurched the opposite direction, and I knew the mains had released, and we were back in free fall, if only for a moment. I couldn't hear the pop of the igniters through my suit like I would have, had I been watching a ground test of the engines on a closed-circuit screen in the bunkhouse. But right on cue, I felt the distinct rumble of the retro rockets starting up, creep through the structure of the capsule, and begin to shake my bones. The vibrations built in intensity as the engines throttled up and slowed our descent aggressively, despite no longer being undershoot. The world outside the window was now completely red as a cloud of dust enveloped the capsule, kicked up by the retro rockets during the last couple 100 feet of our descent. We seemed to stop moving then. We just hung there for a moment, and then momentary silence. The retro rockets had cut out and we fell the last few inches, landing hard on the ground. The hydraulic dampeners in the landing legs softened the blow just enough to avoid broken backs in our quest for immortality. The silence, the fall, and the skull-cracking jolt as we hit the ground seemed to happen all at the same time. But then that was it. We had landed and here we were. Mars. The dust settled with no exhaust plume to continue kicking it up around the capsule, and for the first time I could see the landscape from ground level out the window. My heart raced with excitement, eager to get out of the capsule after 6 grueling months of confinement to small metallic enclosures, but mostly excited to set foot on another planet for the first time in human history. This was a momentous moment for all of mankind, and somehow my 2 colleagues and I were here on their behalf, entrusted with the dreams of humanity. We'd been destined to make history, and here we were about to do just that. I looked over at my two colleagues, and through the glass of our helmets I could see their anxious eyes filled with wonder, and they nodded their heads, silently consenting to go forward with our mission. I reached up with my right hand and clumsily fingered the latch on my harness through my gloves. I pressed the release button, and the harness let go of me. The other two followed suit and began to move about in their seats, getting their bearings and preparing to get up. I looked around, and using my arms to help steady my balance after months of weightlessness, I got up from my seat, and I felt my weight shift onto my legs. I breathed deeply, breathing in the familiar tanked oxygen mixture I'd been breathing since we'd left the safety of Earth, and it was comforting in a way, mentally preparing myself for what was to come. I walked carefully, ducking in the cramped capsule to avoid hitting my head on the extraneous hardware above on my way to the door. When I reached the door, I placed an arm on the frame to lean on while I pushed the button to depressurize the capsule. There was a hiss as the pressure inside the capsule dropped to equal that of the world outside the door. I looked back at my colleagues one last time, and they were standing there, just where they were supposed to be, waiting, ready. I grabbed the large round handle of the hatch with both hands and exhaled one last time. I leaned into it, turning the large, heavy handle, and it released. I pushed the capsule door open, and a flood of bright light came in. As my eyes adjusted, I turned around and stepped gingerly onto the first step of the ladder, holding onto the railing as I went. Then I took the second step, and then the third. And then with one last step, my boots touched Martian soil, and I looked down at them, sharply contrasted against the red regolith they sunk into ever so slightly. I turned around slowly, the sun flaring on my visor, and I took it all in. The view was beyond anything anyone could imagine, I thought to myself as I looked upon our new world. The splendor of it was infinite. "Sally, dinner's ready!" She heard her mom yell from inside the glowing warmth of their house. She was laying in the grass, looking up at the stars on a cool autumn eve, her vivid imagination transporting her to another world. She imagined what it might be like to go to Mars, what it might be like to be the first person to land on another planet. Maybe she'd know one day, she thought to herself as she turned her back on the twinkling night sky and got up, pushing herself up on the prickly green grass. She skipped up the hill to the back door of their house where she met her mother, silhouetted by the soft light in the doorway.